Welcome back, Focus Learners, to another explainer. Today, we're going to dive into a concept that literally separates resilient, enduring organizations from those that just inevitably capsize when the waters get rough. We're exploring the absolutely crucial dynamic of how continuous feedback keeps teams and leaders afloat. And to really get our heads around this, we aren't going to start in some sterile corporate boardroom. No, instead I want you to picture yourself out on the open water. You're on a sailboat. You've set your course, the sails are perfectly trimmed, and man, you're making great time. But nature, much like the market, rarely stays still.
Think about the physical reality of that exact moment. The wind shifts, and this time, well, it's noticeable. You can literally feel the sail pulling unevenly against the mast. The boat begins to drift off its previous line. Now, it's not some violent jerk, right? It's not enough to immediately alarm anyone on board, but the change in the physical environment, it's crystal clear. The elements have changed, and your current setup, your configuration, is just no longer perfectly matched to them.
So someone on the boat feels that uneven pull. They look up, and they just say it. We're off. It's a simple, sharp realization. You know, you don't need a fancy weather satellite or absolute certainty or a 3-page analytical report to recognize that reality has shifted. You only need to realize that what was true a moment ago, the wind direction you literally just planned for, is simply no longer true right now.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, Reality versus the Plan.
Let's transition from that physical boat right into the boardroom. That exact moment of the wind shifting happens in our businesses, our projects, and our leadership teams every single day. A new fact emerges, a visible risk shows up, or maybe a core assumption we built our entire quarterly strategy on is suddenly proven completely wrong. The signal has arrived. And when that signal hits, leaders face a massive dilemma. The group has to make a choice. On one side, you have change course. You align with the new reality, which, let's be honest, takes a lot of effort and humility. But on the other side, you have protect the public story. You just stay the course because, well, that's what everyone already signed up for. The boat is already moving, and the momentum of that previous course carries some incredible weight. And that brings us to the core operational framework of our explainer today. Feedback drives change means that decisions must stay tied to what is real, to the actual act of correction, and to who answers for the outcomes. A pivot in this framework is never a failure. Not at all. It's simply a recalibration to the truth. If the group shifts direction based on new facts or new risks, they aren't failing. They are simply trimming the sails. So the absolutely crucial point here is this. Past accuracy does not guarantee future utility. It doesn't matter if the plan was brilliant when it was drafted 6 months ago. The environment has changed. Holding onto a plan just because it used to be right is frankly like refusing to steer a boat because your initial heading was correct at the dock. The only question that matters for a leader is whether the plan still fits what is happening right now.
Which brings us to Section 2, the high cost of denial.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is, if the logic of changing course is so obvious, why don't more leaders do it? Well, it comes down to these invisible internal forces that prioritize the public story over actual results. First up, going public. Once a plan is announced, reversing it just feels like a massive cost to credibility, right? Second, momentum. A moving ship is hard to turn. People are already doing the work. And third, admitting fault. So many leaders feel that saying, "we were wrong," threatens their legitimacy. These forces combined make it incredibly tempting to just hold the line and, hope you can adjust later.
But here's the catch. Later makes the correction so much larger. Just look at the life cycle of a delayed decision. The signal arrives. That's step 1. But because of those internal forces we just talked about, the signal is ignored or rationalized away in step 2. Over time, moving into step 3, the distance between the plan and reality grows. The drift is kind of gradual at first, but it compounds. And ultimately, you are forced into step 4, a costly, painful, and really hard recovery.
The longer a plan continues after it no longer fits, the more punishing it gets. It becomes vastly more costly, it becomes much more visible to everyone watching, it becomes incredibly disruptive to the organization, and ironically, it becomes significantly more difficult to explain to your stakeholders than an early pivot ever would have been. The gap between expectation and reality simply becomes way too wide to hide.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 3, the architecture of course correction.
So what does it actually look like when teams successfully and continuously align with reality? How do we build the architecture of course correction right into our daily operations? Well, the best teams adopt this exact mindset. They boldly declare that they are not wed to yesterday's plan. What they learned this morning literally changes what they ship this afternoon. It's such a beautifully energetic way to work. It means that what was decided before still mattered. I mean, it got you out of the harbor, but it doesn't need to be stubbornly defended when the conditions change.
Think about the stark contrast here. An early change is just a small shift in the sail. It's a tiny turn of the wheel. It keeps things perfectly aligned, and honestly, it's completely normal. A delayed shift, on the other hand, that's a crisis. It requires dropping the sails, turning the boat violently, and executing a massive recovery effort. When feedback drives change, decisions remain open just long enough to respond gracefully.
And that leads us to Section 4, Why Dissent Drives Change.
There is a final, really critical piece to this whole puzzle. You cannot have early change if people are afraid to speak up. For signals to be acted on early, an environment of deep psychological safety has to exist. Someone has to be brave enough to say, hey, we're off. And this brilliantly illustrates the connection between culture and agility. You literally cannot have course correction without the freedom to point out the drift. Dissent must be welcomed. If concerns are raised but not followed, or signals are heard but not acted upon, the plan just blindly continues. Dissent is the prerequisite. It's the early warning system that allows feedback to actually drive change.
When a team truly embraces this, something vital is preserved. Decisions remain close to what happens next. The boat stays perfectly aligned with the wind, no matter how often it shifts. Because a plan is not some sacred document, right? It holds its value only while it still fits what is actually happening in the present moment.
Which brings us to the ultimate test of leadership and accountability. When that drift happens, when the distance between your strategic plan and actual reality becomes undeniably visible, do the people making the decisions still feel the impact of what their choices do? Or are they insulated, kind of just forcing the rest of the boat to weather the storm? Think about your own teams for a second. Are you steering by feedback, or are you just protecting the story? Until next time, keep your eyes on the wind and keep learning.